And once we're ready, Shima, I can pull up the presentation.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. Great.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the reader info session. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon to learn more about the program, learn more about Maine initiatives, and what it means to be a reader as it relates to this fund. Before we start, just want to introduce myself and Martina, who make up the ILO Fund team. My name is Shima Kabarigi. I use she, her pronouns. I am the director of the fund, and I have been in that position since the inception of this program, which was in 2018. And I'm joined by Martina Leek, who is the program associate of the fund and has been with us now a year, right? Or close to a year now, and supports all aspects of the program as well.
Thanks, Shima.
Before we start, we just want to make sure that we acknowledge that we are on unceded Wabanaki territory. And yes, we bring the spirit into this meeting today. Because we don't know many of you on the screen, if folks are able to use a chat function, we'd love to know who's with us today. So if you could share your name, pronouns, that's optional. And then we'd like to know why you're here today. Why are you interested in being a reader for the ILO Fund? These questions would help us to get to know you better and hopefully forge a relationship with you beyond this meeting. Thank you, David. It's great to meet you. Great question, David. We'll make sure towards the end of the meeting today, we'll be able to answer questions and we can talk about the impact of what we're trying to strive by including a reader process in our participatory grant making program. Great. Meadow, Beth, great. Great to meet you, Michelle. Awesome. Allison and Skylar, thanks for joining us today. I think, Martina, we're ready to move on to the next slide if that works for you. Hi, Erica. And so today we'll be talking about a couple of things. For those who have never interfaced with Maine initiatives, we'll be sharing who we are, the vision of our institution, also the vision of the ILO Fund as it is in its new iteration as of 2024, our process and next steps, and we'll reserve some time to answer questions as well. So here are a few words that will be in terms we'll be using throughout the presentation. We wanted to make sure that folks are able to understand and build relationships with this, with these words and terms as we'll be using them throughout this 1 hour presentation. Who are we? So Maine Initiatives is a network of individuals supporting greater social, economic, environmental justice in Maine. This is done through informed and intentional and collective philanthropy. This is our general mission statement. This is what the founders of Maine Initiatives aspired to in terms of really working towards social change. In the last 9 years, though, we have become a bit more granular in terms of our focus and framework. And Maine Initiatives since 2016 has been focused on racial justice and racial justice in Maine, and supporting organizations and communities working to thrive for racial justice or mitigate racial injustice happening throughout communities here in Maine. And so we have been using that framework. That framework has informed the design, the implementation of programs that I'll share a bit about in a bit here. And so here are our programs. Our first program that has been in inception since 2016, Grants for Change, was really the catalyst program once we pivoted to a racial justice framework. And this program supports organizations who are working on racial justice causes here in Maine, with a particular focus on the Indigenous communities and multi-generational Black communities and priorities of those communities as well. The program also supports organizing as it relates to that framework. And so Julian Rowland, who is my colleague, has been stewarding this work for about 3 years. He's supported by Bree, who facilitates and ensures that folks are able to interface with the program. And yeah, they will be beginning the program shortly. In about 2 weeks, actually, they'll announce that they are opening up the process to invite applications. So really exciting time for Grants for Change. The Immigrant-Led Fund, which is the program that Martina and I lead, focuses on supporting immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker communities through immigrant-led organizations. And in the past 7 years, we've supported more than 40 organizations that are immigrant-led and serving as well. And more on that momentarily. The other program that we integrated, brought to Maine Initiatives, is Maine Share. It's a workplace giving program that my colleague Amanda stewards. Some exciting news as it relates to Maine Share is down the pipeline. If you are on our mailing list, you will hear more about Maine Share in our upcoming e-news. If you're not, I encourage you to sign up, as that specific program has some exciting activities and news to share with the Maine Initiatives community. The other program is Outdoor Equity Fund. This is a nature-based program that supports nature-based organizations led by BIPOC organizations. It was launched last year. They are in their second year, and actually will in 2 weeks have a retreat where they'll get to decide a slate of 10 organizations that will make part of that community. And so currently there are 10 organizations that are being supported by this fund. But by the end of June, I think the program will have 20 organizations that are providing outdoor access to marginalized and impacted communities of color here in Maine. And lastly, on the horizon, the Giving Project is a donor organizing model. We have been invited by peers and like-minded organizations across the nation to be part of this community to integrate this model. This is a cross-class, cross-race program and opportunity. And so beyond and becoming a reader for the ILO Fund, if you're looking for other ways to be involved, this will be another opportunity that comes to the Maine Initiatives community in the fall. So What's our work? What do we do? We here have made a long-term commitment to centering racial justice and racial equity in our work, as I've mentioned. And so we see our work being the intersection of community organizing. And so really organizing communities and organizations in ways that advance racial justice and racial equity in our state. And so that is both convening those organizations, providing the resources needed for them to do that work. We also organize philanthropy, our sector, in really looking to improve upon their programs, improve upon their relationship with communities that they serve, really using the racial justice and racial equity framework as well. And so we very much see ourselves as organizers of these distinct communities. And at the center of that is racial justice and racial equity. What's unique about Maine initiatives and the work that we do as it relates to supporting BIPOC organizations in Maine is that we use a radically participatory place-based um, philanthropy to advance racial justice and equity in Maine communities. And so, really, what that means is really centering those who best understand the issues to participating in funding decisions through community-led grant-making advisory committees. And I'll be speaking on the ILO grant-making advisory committee in momentarily. And so what do we mean by community-led philanthropy? And what we do is we identify and mobilize and leverage resources. So what we do is pool resources that are really needed to move the needle on social change, right? We also organize collective and informed decision making. And so, as I mentioned, decision making power is really held at the advisory committee level. And that's comprised of community leaders, activists, individuals with lived experience, invested in movement building. And that looks differently across programs. And we'll be, sharing more as it relates to the ILO community. But the essence is really centering those with lived experience, those most impacted, to make informed decisions, right? And then lastly, we fund and strengthen organizations. So really putting resources in the hands of the organizations that are really on the front lines of organizing, supporting community and activism as well, really trying to move the needle of social change in Maine. And we see ourselves living in this paradox where we recognize the process of applying for funding has had a historical, you know, um, has a history of harm and is really vested in legacies of white supremacy, slavery, and genocide. And we see that that legacy is still around and persists today within all systems, institutions, including philanthropy and main initiatives as well, right? We also acknowledge that our efforts in creating and administering the ILO fund within the system will be imperfect and are evolving, right? And so we see this fund as being obviously iterative, informed by community, improved upon by community perspective. And so very much not static, right? Evolving and allowing us to get in better alignment with the communities that we're part of and we want to support. So the ILO Fund, as of 2024, we are now a participatory grant making program. The goal is to fund and strengthen and also convene immigrant refugee migrant nonprofits here in Maine. It seeks to organize people and resources in support of those efforts across the state and efforts that intervene really on persistent issues experienced in particular by immigrants of color, right? So issues like xenophobia, racialized discrimination, and insufficient support from the public sector, from municipals and state governments, as it relates to this specific community. So a quick overview of the fund. So this year, the fund will provide 3-year support of general operating support to a cohort of 10 organizations. The groups that are selected will receive $15,000 per year for 3 years of unrestricted funding. And in addition to funding, grantees will be invited to participate in a series of peer learning, capacity building activities, and community outreach activities over the course of the grant period. And that will be informed by the cohort. They will very much be part of the design of any activities as it relates to learning together, capacity building, and bringing them together to address whatever priorities they'd like to address. So the vision of the fund. As I said, racial justice and racial equity is really the framework that we use across our programs. And as such, as it relates to the ILO fund, we see that advancing racial justice requires naming particular histories and realities of immigrant injustice in the United States, and how those legacies and ongoing violence continue to impact specific communities today, right? The ILO Fund seeks to name and respond to a couple of things. One, the particular effects of xenophobic rhetoric and policies on the opportunities of immigrants of color to seek safety within the US. And then the current restrictive systems designed to reduce immigrants, regardless of status, from accessing fundamental necessities such as healthcare, housing, safe work conditions in Maine. And so through this fund and through this through building community with folks who are part of that community, supporting that community, we're hoping that we have the opportunity to address these two things by way of the work that they do, helping them organize to mitigate these two things that we have seen really within communities, right? We've seen that locally, we've seen this regionally, that immigrants of color in particular have a unique experience as it relates to interfacing with systems. And so the fund is committed to doing a couple of things, to supporting organizations that provide critical direct service support to immigrants in Maine, advance immigrant flourishing through community building, grassroots organizing, advocacy, and/or policy change. Also committed to strengthen immigrant communities by embracing and preserving cultural practices. Culture preservation is valuable and important, and so we are committed to supporting organizations that thrive and that strive to do this, and also supporting organizations that are led and serve immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers here in Maine. In the priorities of the ILO Fund are a couple of things. We seek to support work in the state that does these, to support work in the state that is intersectional, and intersectional could mean organizations that address priorities in the education space, workforce development, that interface with distinct communities, right? As well, we are also looking to support organizations that have geographical diversity. We recognize that not all immigrants and refugees are only in southern Maine, so it's important to also recognize that there are communities outside of the Cumberland County and organizations who are supporting those communities as well. So that is a consideration for us. And then programmatic and thematic variety. We want to ensure that we have an ecosystem of organizations that are doing creative, innovative, and diverse work across the state as well. The fund also seeks uh, to fund efforts from both established organizations and new organizations. These are organizations in their first year of existence, and so we're deeming hub organizations as those that are more established, have more resources, right, have more human resource, and have been in existence for more than a few years. And emerging organizations are organizations that are nascent, newly formed organizations, organizations looking for startup capital to be able to meet the needs and priorities of their communities. And so, who do we fund? The ILO Fund grants to organizations that are immigrant-led, so immigrant-led organizations, groups, or even coalitions, right? We support organizations that exclusively or primarily work in Maine, organizations that are implementing programming that advances immigrant flourishing, also programming that primarily serves and supports immigrant communities as well, and have an operating budget of under $1.5 million. Our process. And so, as I mentioned, we pivoted to a participatory model this year, and Martina and I, for the first quarter, worked on developing the funding opportunity announcement, the reader opportunity announcement, and through that process, we felt that it was really important to center community in the process, and so we identified individuals that have had a relationship with the fund, with Maine initiatives, so former grantees and community leaders, to ensure that what we were developing was really in alignment with the communities that we were seeking to deepen our relationship with, right? And so we formed a sounding board, and the sounding board was really instrumental in developing those two specific opportunities that I mentioned, on also informing us on the strategy and vision, ensuring that the vision of the fund really reflected the aspiration of this program, and also the aspiration of the community as it relates to this program as well. We are going to be closing the application process on Friday. Really excited to announce we have seen increased flow of applicants submitting their applications in the last couple of days. And so we're hoping that we have a robust pool of applicants this year. We are asking community members to sign up to become readers, and the deadline for that is June 10th. And then we'll be forming a grant making advisory committee. And so these are 20 to 25 peers, majority from the immigrant refugee community. They will engage in a multi-day grant making retreat in August. And at the end of that retreat, we will have a slate of organizations that make up the ILO fund. And then we will be making, as I mentioned, grant selection and announcing those that selection early August. So I'm going to quickly go through this. Again, for our process is the funding opportunity, the reader process. So inviting both grant applicants and readers to apply for those two distinct opportunities. As I mentioned, the reader opportunity announcement application is due on June 10th. We will also be having, once folks sign up, we will be having an orientation and supporting those that are new to this process to understand what's required and field questions as it relates to how to think about evaluation and reading applications as well. As I mentioned, we'll be convening a committee in July to make decisions on a slate of organizations that will make up the fund. And then once we have a slate of organizations, we will be building opportunities for them to connect and learn from each other. I'm really excited for that as well. Yeah, so here's where you come in. If folks haven't seen the reader opportunity announcement, I think Martina will put that in the chat for you. You can also find this on our website if you go to the ILO Fund landing page. And so that is also where it lives currently.
I think because I'm sharing my screen, Shima, I don't know if I'm able to plug in those links right now, but I'm happy to at the end. Or if you have them accessible, feel free to. But we'll definitely share them out at the end.
Thank you. So what are we asking from you all? What's the commitment? And so what's expected is for folks to complete a conflict of interest form. We'll also be sharing a demographic survey that's optional. Folks will be asked to review 3 applications from the applicant organizations. Each application will require, I would say, 1 to 2 hours to read, assess, and score. Readers will have approximately 30 days to submit application evaluations. I will say also that Martina and I will be here to answer questions in that process. If there are things that come up for you, we will be available to help you go through mitigating or answering or addressing those questions. Um, as I mentioned, we have an optional reader orientation that will be via Zoom on Wednesday, June 12th from 12 to 1. And so encourage folks to join as that will be a space where we are able to also field questions that may come up for you. All right, the application. The application actually takes only about 10 minutes to complete. If you have a Google account, you have the option of saving and coming back to it. And so encourage those folks who do to remember that option. But really, I think, I just did that before the session and it took me about 8 minutes. We hope it's a seamless process for folks. And so the questions that we ask on general contact information. We also are curious about why you're interested in becoming a reader, and in particular, as it relates to the ILO fund. If you have any relevant experience, both in terms of having been part of other reader processes, or have relevant experience as it relates to the immigrant-led ecosystems. And so if you've had worked in the space, supported those communities, we'll ask questions um, as it relates to that. And also whether you would be interested in joining the advisory committee as well. So those are the information we hope to gather by way of this reader application. And so we also will request your permission to share your responses. And this is for the purpose of collective learning, for inspiration and to share appreciations. And the appreciations obviously are optional. And so I think one of the things that I just wanted to mention is that as I've interfaced with the Grants for Change process, um, the reader evaluation um, has been really instrumental in terms of supporting not only the grant making committee in terms of having important conversations as it relates to deciding the slide, but also some of those and the information collected has also been really valuable for organizations that interface with this process. So just wanted to mention that. And so here are the ways in which information can be shared, depending on the reader's comfortability, right? And so, but just really wanted to encourage for those who are willing to share, to provide us with the permission to share, because I think it's been a really valuable process to be able to share back the information to not only the grant making committee, as I mentioned, but also to applicants as well. Um, so beyond this process, there are different ways in which you can support our participatory grant making process. One way is to make a gift to the ILO Fund and main initiatives. As I mentioned, also join our mailing list if you haven't already, as there are some really exciting things coming down the pipeline. Also, learn more about the Giving Project, this donor organizing project that will be stewarded by our colleague Julian, starting this fall. And then really encourage you to share this opportunity with friends and others in your network, in your community, who are looking for ways to connect with other communities, looking to connect and learn more about this growing community as well. Here's a perfect opportunity to do that. And as I mentioned, the grant making advisory committee will comprise of 20 to 25 folks. And so these are past ILO fund grantees, current grantees, also individuals with specific proximity and knowledge of the ecosystem, BIPOC individuals with an expressed interest in greater proximity to the immigrant-led effort, and also main initiatives volunteers, donors, institutional donors as well. Um, Lastly, individuals with peer and partner organizations with a clear commitment to deepening their learning and funding of the sector, right, to advance immigrant flourishing. So the evaluation criteria. Here are the segments here, the questions we'll be asking you to reflect on engage with. What is your impression of the organization? Is the organization clearly stating their mission? Um, the work that does this organization have clear and understandable programs? Do you think the organization's programs and activities will bring about the impact they seek? And I think more importantly for us here, to what extent does this organization advance immigrant flourishing? And then asking organizations to tell their stories. How would they know? How do they know that they are advancing immigrant flourishing in their respective community? How are they articulating that story as well? The application, I have to say, as for applicants, is we try to make it seamless and less burdensome. We hope that it is, and so we don't want this to be an arduous process, a really time-consuming process, but a process that allows us to really get to the vision that I articulated earlier. So next steps. All right. Read the reader opportunity announcement. Read the application. You are attending the info session, so thank you for doing that. Really encourage you to complete and submit the application if you haven't already. The deadline, as I mentioned, is June 10th. And then check your email. We will send confirmations and share orientation details via email by June 11th. Questions? I've been talking for a long time. If there are questions that feel really specific to your particular situation, we are happy to answer that offline, please feel free to email us at ilofund@maininitiatives.org. And thank you, Martina, for facilitating the slideshow.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just going to stop. The last slide was just a thank you for attending. But I think now we can just open it up for questions if anybody has any.
Any questions, curiosities?
So I have a quick question. If we filled out the Google form, we're just waiting to hear confirmation on the 11th, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
And David, I just saw your question in the chat. I believe I did see your name, but I can confirm as soon as we hop off of this call, and I can circle back with you and let you know. But I
Thank you.
believe so. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for signing up.
It sounded like Michelle had the same question.
Any other questions?
Just to confirm that being a reader you don't have to be part of the grant making advisory committee, correct? Okay.
Yeah, and maybe let me clarify one thing as well. Like, not everyone that signs up or opts to become part of the grant making committee makes it to the grant making committee, right? For us, because this is a long-term program, we just want to get a sense of ways in which people want to interface with the program beyond this process. So, maybe the likelihood of us going back to that pool of names of folks who want to be part of that community, we would then go back and, engage with them next year to see if they're still interested. It's just to get a sense of, people's level of capacity, interests, as it relates to how they want to be involved with the fund.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Well, great. Feel free to reach out to Martina and I if you have additional questions. As I mentioned, once you complete the form, you'll be hearing from us by June 11th. But David, Martina will circle back with you.
Yeah, I'll make sure to circle back with anyone who has said that they've filled out the form and just want confirmation. I'd also like to just echo, invite your friends, people who are looking for different ways to volunteer or just looking for more information about anti-racism work happening in the state, specifically immigrant-led organizations doing really amazing work in the state. We're going to post this recording on the Main Initiatives website under the ILO Fund tab. So you can direct folks there if they'd like to watch this video or read the reading opportunity announcement that has all of this information as well. Yeah. Great.
I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Here.
Thanks.